So what's going on? How have you been? How are you doing during this the craziness that we're all a part of?
Uh, Pretty good. Just hanging out with my family a lot and trying to work on the internet and whatever and stuff like that.
So to get started, so congratulations, lots of things to congratulate you about. So I think right, you have a movie that's out as well.
Yeah, it comes out June 23rd, so it's still coming out. But
Oh, so,
we're in the prep stage of it, so that's fun and stuff like that.
and then your vice presidential run. So well, I guess this is a good end because you talk about you're a transhumanist. Well, tell me how you define yourself. I mean, that's probably a good start.
I'm a transhumanist, somebody who believes in using science and technology to radically modify the human being and also to modify, the human body. And that can be anything from exoskeleton suits to be able to climb Mount Everest or brain implants and stuff like that. But it's become a social movement that I'm, now one of the more visible figures of, and it's growing quite fast. And especially in the time of coronavirus, there's even more of an appeal towards science-based social movements, given the nature of what we're all sort of facing at the moment.
I mean, there's a lot of headlines today, and I imagine that some of it's just sort of pure media sensationalism about this is the beginning of a new normal. How do you see, through a transhumanist lens, what this new normal is? Because, the media has a tendency to paint it in dystopian undertones, with dystopian, maybe even overtones, actually.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't. In all honesty, and this is not the most PC thing, but I understand it's a pandemic and people are dying, and that's terrible and very sad. But right now, a very small percentage of the population is being directly killed by this pandemic, and so while it's really like more affecting the lives of the 99 point percent of the other people out there, and so I'm kind of worried about depression era situation because of jobs and the increased poverty. And I'm just reading today in the Wall Street Journal, they got hospitals in rural areas that are shutting down for financial issues. So uh, one of the big issues I have with the coronavirus is that I feel like science research is being increased to fight viruses, but the other research, the other like kind of more transhumanist stuff, like 3D printing hearts or bionic organs or implants that upload our minds to the computers, all that's kind of being put on the wayside at the moment. And so whether this is actually beneficial for transhumanism as a social movement is probably not the case. It's probably going to set us back 5, 10 years in terms of where the research goes, just because there's less money, because the world is also going to be going through a major global recession as a result of the coronavirus and how we've chosen to deal with it.
So tell me about how, if because as a transhumanist, I mean, FM sort of in the milieu, how you thought of him, how you, well, basically what you knew and what you plucked, what you kept, and what you perhaps discarded from some of his worldviews or even visions of how we're going to pan out, as it were.
Well, unfortunately, I still haven't seen the documentary, and I apologize for that. It's just been a bit crazy and other things, so many things going on. But I do look forward to seeing it. And I did watch the preview. So, as a result, I don't know FM that well, except from like people that have told me about him, like Max Moore and Natasha Moore and those kinds of people and stuff. Um, but I mean, anybody, from what I understand, anyone that led the future at that point was truly visionary, because it's kind of easy now to understand that we're going to end up in a world where you know I guess that's going to be very futurist oriented. But then I thought it's very hard to. The science wasn't there. You really had to have a science fiction kind of attitude to it. And people often say, why did the transhumanist movement start really emerging the last 5, 10 years in terms of almost becoming a mainstream movement? And a lot of it has to do with the fact that the science is finally here. We are putting, Elon Musk does have a company that works on putting implants into people's brains and stuff like that. And there are, there are these things happening. People are getting out of wheelchairs because of exoskeleton technology. And so I'm pretty impressed with his visionary FM's visionary ability to see a lot of these things.
So he thought that representative democracy was becoming obsolete, or at least less relevant in a hyper-connected world. And he thought that representative democracy would gradually be replaced by referendum-driven or direct democracy, and that would be, that our representatives and our leaders would be sort of phased out in his terms. So I'm assuming that you have a different take on how you see representative democracy evolving in the next 20 or 30 years?
Well, I mean, in all honesty, I have advocated for a number of different things. When I run political campaigns, I try to stay on the straight and narrow and just say, like, the big, most visionary thing I talk about is direct digital democracy, where we would be using a lot more of our devices in real time to influence politicians. I actually think the United States would do better to have a fourth branch of government that could, we could vote in real time. So, for example, when George W. Bush wanted to take us to war in Iraq and the people really didn't approve of it, we could have, as a populace, voted in real time and maybe overcome Congress, or at least put up a legal challenge, because half the population of America would have said, no, we don't want to go to war. I think, but when you talk about where are we going, and because of coronavirus, it's a little bit tough to say. My faith in humanity has sort of been shaken in the sense that I think a lot of people don't really get that we're very close to overcoming death. We need the next 20 or 30 years of science to be full speed in order to achieve it. And then we're going to reach this point, whether it's through genetic editing or it's through bionic organs or age reversal, whatever it is, where everybody, hopefully, or at least most people, have an opportunity to decide if they want to die or not, and maybe even reverse their age. Unfortunately, if we get pushed back 10 years or whatever, people, because religious reasons, don't want it on planet Earth, we might not see that era. But I think what's very important, though, is humanity moves forward, so we do have that option. And that kind of changes the dynamics of world government, because in my opinion, I would like to have a kind of a global government that sort of spans everything, where all the laws are sort of universal. We don't have some women being beat in some countries and other countries like America where they have total freedom. That does, I think, we ought to have humanitarian values that spread across everywhere, and ultimately a giant democracy across all planets with no nation borders. I mean, as a libertarian, I've never supported the idea of borders. I just support everyone goes wherever they want to go. Let's have virtual currencies. Let's have, anyone do what they want to do on planet Earth, as long as they're not beating up somebody or stealing from somebody. And that's my version of a perfect government, one where I can vote on leaders, and maybe someone in China would be voting on those same leaders. But I'm no longer sure if we're really going to go down that path, only because it seems like we're always into some kind of feudal system where there are some powerful people, and they try to keep, like, borders closed, and they're to me, it seems like humanity is almost anti-globalization half the time, just because they're so stuck on their ethnicities and so stuck on their religions and so stuck on their way of being. Whereas I would much rather have a species becoming transhuman, and we're all out together, and government is something that is determined through, the most freedom and the most democracy available. And that would easily mean no more nations, and that would mean no more borders, no more anything like that. But I don't know if we're ever going to actually get there.
Well, I was hoping for more optimism this morning, but so in terms of, you've chosen to work within a system, and as a libertarian, and that being said, we're now seeing, even Republicans really relying on, I guess, a federal system, or a system that is, going to take care of people that, quote unquote, can't get taken care of. So we've got all these things coming together. We're talking about local, things that are really local, and grassroots, and yet also things that are completely unlocal, because these supply chains aren't global. So we've got all these things coming to a head. So I guess the big question is, you've made these big decisions to work within the system, rather than sort of trying to shape it from the outside. How how optimistic are you that that's the way to go?
Well, I mean, on one hand, I'm trying to be someone who's visionary and saying things that get out there, and that are provocative. And on another hand, I have to work within the system because I want to be alive and make progress. And so I think it's been tough because if you read my book, The Transhumanist Wager, you know that it's very it's sort of militant, it's hardcore, it's incredibly libertarian. It shows a lot of my ultimate ideals on how somebody would achieve overcoming death and what would be needed and getting into a world that's non-religious and whatnot. But in the real world, where I'm a father, I'm married, I have 2 kids, I own businesses, mortgages, running for office, I've got to deal with, a lot of people, write for the New York Times, those kind of things. I'm much more practical and try to stay based. And that's a tough call because, it's a balance between being normal and also trying to lead people forward. If you lead them too fast, they end up hating you. If you just take baby steps with them, they can sometimes go with you. And unfortunately, that's sort of my plight. Believe me, I would rather move a lot faster. If I said, if I ever got into the White House, I would change everything. I mean, I would take trillions of dollars and put it directly into the life extension thing. I would make, downsize the military dramatically and work entirely on, transforming the species so that we don't have to die and we can get to the transhumanist age. But those are incredibly radical things. And, 95% of Americans wouldn't agree with me on that, maybe 99% of Americans. So you have to remember, if you want to be a public figure and you actually want to make progress and influence people, then you're going to have to go along with the baby steps.
So has the figurehead of transhumanism, I know you've talked about this a lot, but you're comfortable being a figurehead for transhumanism or a particular sector? How does that pan out for you in terms of, are you?
Well, I was just going to say, I try to be a figurehead for the entire movement because whatever happens, I'm still the one who's mostly in the media, and I'm the only real journalist of the movement, which, I'm surprised. I keep telling people, if you want to make your mark, you really need to make it in terms of journalism, because, you can be on Facebook all day long, but one New York Times article is more traffic than an entire year or maybe 10 years of being on Facebook in terms of influence. So I've been telling people that they need to kind of change their methodology. And, I've told all the elder academics about this as well. But I just try to represent it in a balanced way and move it forward. But people need to understand that if you want transhumanism to grow up and be a mainstream movement, it's going to require looking historically at what other movements have done and emulating those movements. So, for example, the environmental movement, which 40 years ago had, a whole 10 people, and they were just Greenpeace people trying to stop nuclear explosions or stop whaling. And then all of a sudden they became a multi-billion person movement that the entire world is focused on, not Greenpeace, but they launched the environmental movement. How can we make transhumanism become a multi-billion person movement? And that requires a whole bunch of different facets, of different strategies, decentralization, people going off in different areas, millions of journalists, even accountants and attorneys, and filing lawsuits. And I mean, there's a big giant machine for it. And so I push people to do all these things, but transhumanism has grown mostly within the youth, mostly within millennials. And millennials have a tendency to not be able to get the job done at this point because, in fact, a lot of them are quite entitled in America, and they're just kind of like, they just want free money. It's all about basic income for them and all this. And that's great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I support a lot of these ideas. But in the end of the day, like, making a world-class movement requires 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, work, and not just sitting on Facebook arguing against each other. And I keep telling people this. We have for example, the presidential candidate right now, the Transhumanist Party. It's he's getting like virtually no coverage, whereas my candidacy received at this point, almost 100 million views. It was exploding and doing all these different things, and it's all because I led through activism. I did projects that people would notice, and like the coffin bus and whatnot. And in order for transhumanism to move, people have to either be engaged in campaigns, engaged in different kinds of projects. They have to be off the internet and in the real world doing stuff. And that's been a very difficult thing to get transhumanists to do, is to actually engage in activism, because so many of them are young and they think the world is just an Instagram account.
It's a good. So your own fiction, has an unusual mix of optimism and apocalyptic overtones. Where do you think the utopian and dystopian visions belong in contemporary futuristic narratives?
Well, I'm highly against dystopian visions because I think what's happened is media in general, and I've been a journalist now for 25 years, began at National Geographic when I was in my 20s, has turned towards clickbait type of sensationalism. If it's not sensational, if it's not dark, if it's not like, oh my God, grab your attention, then we simply, like, as a society, don't want to click on it. And I think that's just terrible media coverage and terrible journalism. And I think the bottom line here is that when we're talking about how to get a message out across, it doesn't have to be dark. People need to be attracted to the light. People need to be attracted to optimism. But one of the problems is that media over the last 10 or 20 years has very much turned to the left. And again, I'm not left or right. I kind of embrace a lot of different sides of the spectrum, but it's turned very to this kind of PC woke culture. And the problem with PC woke culture is that it kind of it chains its own self, because by being so polite, you can't actually say anything wrong about anyone else or even look for visionary ideas, because everything is sort of, anytime you want to break outside the box, it's already explosive. It's already controversial. Where the woke kind of media out there has made it so they can't even go outside of that themselves, even when it makes sense. And that's a big problem, because when the only thing that they can do is say, oh, everything is evil, everything is dystopian. I say, oh my God, I have a chip implant in my head. Now I'm communing with the AI and stuff like that. They're like, oh my God, we're going to take over our brains. There's going to be no privacy. Wait a sec. Actually, there's a huge amount of functional reasons you might want that. It might prevent a stroke. It might allow a deeper communication with your wife who's on the other side of the world. I mean, there's a million positive things about it too. But media focuses on the dystopian things. And that's because we live in this kind of crazy PC woke culture where doing anything outside boundaries has become, almost evil. And it just bums me out, because the future is incredibly optimistic. Technology is incredibly optimistic. It's known for bettering our lives from a statistical point of view. So why not, celebrate and talk about the optimism? But man, that's not how media makes money. And if they did that, they'd probably all go bankrupt. It's like we live in this society where, if it's not dark and evil and blood, then it just doesn't sell.
I think what you're saying, if I have to sort of cut in between all this, that as much as you like optimism and the future is filled with a lot of optimism and advances and so on, that in order for us to, or you specifically, to sell these sorts of ideas, there has to be a dark part. I mean, I think that's what you're saying. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Is that what you're saying? Again, as it relates to your own fiction.
Well, and I like talking about darkness. I mean, as a fiction writer, I think you must create. My book, for example, the Transhumanist Wager, it starts off in a dystopia, but it ends in what I would consider, this perfect utopia in a way. Of course, many other readers would say, oh, that a transhumanist world is not a perfect utopia. But from my perspective, that's what happens, because the Transhumanist Wager begins in this ultra right-wing Christian kind of dominate society that doesn't want to use science to improve the human body, and they actually put people in jail that think that way. And I could see we going that direction too. I mean, it's quite possible in 10 years, we got someone like Vice President Mike Pence at the helm, let's say, and he could just say, look, we don't want to, they've already done this. We want to put a moratorium on genetic editing. We want to put a moratorium on different types of radical sciences that could improve human beings. And they'll say, oh, because we don't know what's going to happen. It's a little too dangerous. Not everyone has access to whatever it is. They'll do these things. And I think that's a very dangerous way, because then all of a sudden we can't innovate our way out to become something different, the new species that I would like to become. And so, my fiction ends up always as a utopic person. I kind of write in the Ayn Rand sort of sense, which is I believe that humans are honorable and can do good things full of virtue, and they'll create new societies that will emerge as something beautiful, something very different, not full of the kind of chaos and crap that we are sort of right now. But I usually start in the dystopic way because I sort of feel like we live in a dystopia. I mean, if you ask me right now, I think we do live to many degrees in a giant dystopia. I think the coronavirus thing has made me lose so much of my faith in humanity that I can't even tell you. I mean, I'm completely disappointed that we are completely strangling the economy, and literally, so there's a bunch of, and everyone hates me for this, and that's okay. But people that are about 50 years of age, my age, I'm 47. We had a very realistic chance of, with progress going, no world wars, no asteroid hitting planet Earth, science getting to a point in 20 to 30 to 40 years where we had a very good chance of being able to reverse aging based on like trajectories, 2040, 2050. So I probably could have lived that long. Now, though, because of what might become like a new Depression era stuff, where all of a sudden, people lost jobs, no one's flying, no one's traveling, the world is shifting under our feet because of coronavirus. We're probably going to lose, I would say, I mean, if you haven't read, like Wall Street Journal just reported 200,000 science and medical experiments are now on hold. Literally, people aren't doing them. So some won't get done, some will get started later, but whatever happening, science has been taking a big step backwards. It might be moving forward in the way of virus protection, but that's just one tiny angle of transhumanism. Transhumanism is really like, a whole big giant industry of moving forward all these different parts of the human body. And we're probably going to be sent back 4 or 5 years. That might have ramifications, 4 or 5 years now comes back to 10, 15 years forward. What I'm trying to say is people age 50 may not make it anymore to that point of age reversal. They might just miss it by 10 years. And that's my age group. So I'm super pissed because I feel like, oh, wow, the world has chosen, in order to save a few 100,000 old people, essentially, or I know some young people too, literally shifting the dynamics for a quarter and maybe 250 million people that are now not going to make that window of having a choice for life extension. And it's just really shaken my sense of what the human being is capable of and what the species does. I mean, it doesn't think rationally.
I mean, Aubrey's had when I spoke to Aubrey, he seems more optimistic, and I guess, well, I've got two really final questions. One is, obviously you've got this you're the vice president. What would you do to basically put us back on track, or take advantage of the ideas that transhumanists have if you became vice president, knowing that vice president?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would do is, I think immunocompromised and older people should be very seriously quarantined. I've always thought that from the beginning. I just thought we should have done the Swedish model, which allows people to be sensible in their social distancing and move forward with their businesses. And that way the hit we take is maybe just small. But as it is right now, it's like, I'm just reading about all these businesses failing right now in the Wall Street Journal this morning. It's crazy. I mean, these General Electric, they're talking about airline industries not recovering for 3-4 years, if ever. And it's, oil industry companies. I mean, there's a million. Transhumanism might just be science, but it operates off venture capitalists who feel comfortable to give them millions of dollars to do research. And if the world economy is not moving forward at a similar pace, they won't give that money. And the greatest thing that's happened to transhumanism in the last 5 years is the amount of money that has come into it from outside to make people live longer. And these are from venture capitalists who may not even believe in the transhumanist message, but they believe in the financial message. But without the background of thinking that the economy is going to do good, a lot of money is going to not come through. Those 200,000 science experiments, maybe half or a quarter won't get done anymore. That has real term effects on how we deal with cancer, how we deal with Alzheimer's, how we deal with overcoming the things that we need to really enter into the transhumanist age. And it's just, as vice president, obviously I would be serving under a president who would be making the real decisions, but I would be trying to convince the president that these are the decisions one needs to make in favor of. How can we declare aging a disease? How can we take money, let's say, from the military, which I always want to do, and put it directly into science? My main goal of all my campaigns has always been very simple. It's We want to, instead of a military industrial complex in America, create a science industrial complex. I think, these big giant weapons manufacturers could be dedicating their resources without losing capital to science, to making us enter the transhumanist age, to kind of body modifications and changes like that. And we could all be just as wealthy as before, and they could just as much, I'm not trying to steal money from the military industrial complex. I just want them to change their trajectory so that it goes towards helping human beings. And so that's really my main message, is that stop making bombs, stop fighting wars. Let's care about people's healthcare. We have a war against cancer. We have a war against diabetes. We have a war against Alzheimer's. Especially, we have a war against obesity. I mean, a lot of the people dying, from coronavirus right now have health problems. If we had been able to overcome those health problems already, coronavirus wouldn't have been such a big deal. But it's all these existing factors that we haven't taken care of that's making this virus so powerful.
So, you've pointed to this both in your literature, but also, even in this interview. We're in this interconnected world. It's obviously global supply chains and so on. We're living in a global economy. Where, FM, at least, he had this sort of platform where he felt, obviously, in the last rung of it, we would achieve, this extended longevity or immortality, depending on how you put it. But there would be benchmarks, and ones that you've alluded to, universalism, and then abundance. So do you think, we need to have this universal approach, and then, whether that's universal basic income or, some sort of incentive that was going to look after certain people because of automation, for us to achieve that third rung, which I think is the rung that you want to achieve, which is, universal health or universal longevity. I don't know how you'd phrase it, but there are.
Sure. Well, I have supported a universal basic income despite my libertarian tendencies for now, 5-6 years. Back in 2015, I began doing it, realizing that automation was going to come. And within my universal income framework, I think everybody could pay for their own healthcare and healthcare insurance appropriately. People can make decisions what they want to do. And my universal basic income is very libertarian. It's tax-free. It monetizes the empty federal land that we have, this vast amount of natural resources. I mean, it's called the federal land dividend. And in case you don't know, the 11 most western states of the U.S. are 50% unoccupied federal land. And it contains massive amounts of resources, upwards of $150 trillion. And if you divide all that money and all those resources by every single American individual, it means every single human being in America would have a $500,000 net worth just based on those resources. Those resources can be monetized by big business to then pay out universal basic income. So we could easily come up with $1,000, within a few year, I think, time stretch, if we were to lease out a lot of this land. Or maybe not $1,000 immediately, but we can come to probably $1,500 over a 10 or 20 year time frame, where everybody then, doesn't matter if automation comes, will be getting money based on these federal resources. And that's a great way to let people be able to pay for their own health insurance, pay for their own food, housing, and kind of, you'd probably be able to eliminate like food stamps and all these other things. But I support this system as a method to enabling the future to come faster without civil chaos. I think we can get to a point where a universal basic income will allow the transhumanist age to be facilitated in a dramatic way, just because, all of a sudden people aren't worrying about starving and aren't worrying about necessarily something over their, a roof over their head. And I think it's probably a huge, important goal for transhumanism to succeed, to have a universal basic income of some sort that covers all the basic needs, so that we can worry about what it means to get to the sort of the Star Trek age.
Okay, the two final questions. What's your biggest hope for the future?
My biggest hope for the future is that humans don't fuck it up. I mean, I'm dramatically worried that we will, for some reason or not embrace the transhumanist evolution in ourselves, because either moral reasons, religious reasons, cultural reasons, or even just because we succumbed to a virus because we weren't quick enough in responding to these things. But I worry that humans won't emerge and be strong enough to really understand where we can go and how to get to this true transhumanist age. And my hope is that we will have leaders, especially science-minded leaders, that will say, let us start tackling science issues as a first priority on planet Earth and in the manner of politics, rather than let us tackle issues of tax and Social Security and whatever else it is that most politicians want to tackle. I want to tackle science. I want to use the scientific method. My real hope is that if politicians would start using the scientific method as a means to making decisions, very quickly we would start finding a lot more rational behavior in society.
You're right. I think there's going to be a terrible depression, but we're going to come out of this and be more equipped and hopefully better prepared than for the next eventuality. Hopefully.
Well, look, for the first time in my life, I dramatically hope that I'm wrong about this all, because I'm like, I hope that everyone's optimism is right this time, because I'm just worried that, I've been a businessman my whole life, and I've been to war zones, and I know what happens in a war zone. There's no V-shaped recovery. People leave, people never recover. It's tough. It's not like a normal economic downturn. And I think what people aren't realizing is, if people are afraid to go to nightclubs or get on a plane and go to Hawaii or whatever it is, like that affects there's trickle down effects to everything. And so unless we can come up with new businesses, and it can't all be Facebook. I mean, it can't all be, just online stuff. It has to be real stuff in the real world.